People working in forensics, what was the most shocking thing discovered in your lab? That he was the father. I'm a bookkeeper billing guy at a clinic, and we tested a baby to see if he was the father. Mom and dad were both blonde hair, wife had blue eyes, both looked super white. Kid was really black. Was tested earlier and he didn't have a condition, he was just black. The dad wanted a paternity test cause when you have two white parents and a black kid, raises some questions. Turns out the mom had a black grandfather that didn't show up in their skin and that she didn't know about. Kid was biologically theirs, but just looked totally different. So, not forensics entirely, and not me. I had a professor in college that was pursuing her doctorate while working at the Mayo Clinic. Year after year, a man came in to be tested for a disorder disease that killed his father at that very hospital. Year after year, he tested negative. But every year, he got tested in an effort to stay ahead of it. Because genetics. One year, he tested negative as usual, but the staff had an idea. They cracked open the archives, dug his father's file out and put it next to his. DNA wasn't even close. Poor guy has no idea his late father was never his biological father at all, and the hospital has no right or obligation to inform him. Years ago when I was working as a DNA analyst, our lab received a limp Caesar salad from a local restaurant, takeout box and all. Apparently, the guy who ordered the salad said that it was served with blood in it. The restaurant owner said not possible and that the customer must have blood in it so that he wouldn't have to pay. The customer then decided to promptly bring his salad to our lab along with his DNA sample to prove that it wasn't his. Turns out that it was, and he unknowingly bled into his salad somehow. Oh, there was also that one time a dad sent in a bunch of his daughter's soiled feminine hygiene products into the lab to test for semen. Most shocking thing though was the time a bunch of DNA samples came. To make a long story short, one large vehicle, lots of drugs, two strung out horny couples, one condom being passed back and forth, yes, flipped inside out, and two pregnant couples uncertain about the paternity of each baby. Had the honor of discussing with a soldier in charge of forensics for military examinations, and he told us this story. Death at a refuge camp. Woman. Apparently dead in her sleep. The persons in charge of cleaning her body noticed semen in her genital areas and gave the alarm. Due to the lack of personnel, the soldier had to help a doctor-coroner determine the cause of death. Heart failure. No signs of violence. At least 7 different male bioprints in her. They got very confused, and could tell something was off, but not much more due to the language barrier. They then had the idea of calling a fake soldier and real translator on site, to figure out what her family and countrymen were saying away from the identified translator's ears. Turns out her father was a pimp, and he was prostituting her and her siblings for money under threats. There was a full network on camp he operated, and he had an absurd amount of cash hidden on him when he was arrested. He is now in jail in his country of origin, and his family have been offered protection by our government, but I don't know much else beyond that. Edit. Forgot to mention, the death was of natural causes. She had a birth defect on her heart. However, the doctor said post-discovery of the prostitution ring that her intense work schedule might have, for lack of a better word, worn it too early. She was in her early 20s, and her sisters were in the same age range. I saw something similar as a teacher. My SPED team helped the police rescue a 15-year-old Russian girl who had been lured, by her own aunt, to the UK with the promise of being sent to a nice school. Her aunt confiscated her passport, started physically and emotionally abusing her, then when she was terrified of her aunt, the aunt started prostituting her. I'm shocked that the aunt was still sending her to school, but that's what saved the girl. She broke down and told a teacher eventually. The aunt was a part of a network of these lowlifes. My friend's wife works in one. Getting blood samples from babies that tested positive for coke and meth was apparently fairly common, but the most recent shocking discovery was that the building's plumbing was done in such a way that chemical disposal could backflow into the water fountain drain, and management didn't really care. In doing my MSc in forensic pathology and anthropology, there is a final practical exam component. The examiner hauled in a large cardboard box, the type size you would store documents in. When dumped on the table, it looked like a broken plant pot. No piece was bigger than 1.5 inches diameter. He then goes, "Could you find all the pieces of example of bone and reconstruct it, please?" Turns out it was a 16-year-old girl whose boyfriend had caved her head in with a stone and cut her into tiny bits before burying her in a field. Only reason she was found was because her decomposing flesh caused the plants right here her body to be oddly large and lush for a dry, forgotten field. Had something similar happen in the yard of a very small studio home I was renting. I noticed the first spring and summer that a 3-foot by 7-foot patch of grass grew 3 times as fast in the shape of a very well-formed rectangle. It was about 20 feet from my front door and off to the right. I always suspected there was a shallow grave there. Never asked my landlady about it for obvious reasons, as she lived on the property as well. A few years later, after multiple septic tank issues, things finally came to a head. My wife, child, and myself had been living like we were camping for 2 weeks with no ability to put anything into the septic. If you flushed, shit came up in the shower. The landlady accused us of ruining the septic system and took her time getting a plumber out there. The plumber discovered the problem. Only one branch of the leach field of 4 pipes was unclogged and was almost fully clogged by that time. It was located directly below the patch of grass described earlier. The landlady was out $3,500 because tree roots were the problem. The plumber told her in front of me that if she had authorized the repair he recommended 24 months prior, it would have only cost $1,000. We moved shortly after because I was pissed about shitting in a bucket and the landlady was pissed I was dumping it in the backyard for 2 weeks. F you, Patty, you crusty old witch. I was working as a scanning electron microscope technician for the R&D branch of a private company when the head scientist gave me an unknown sample to cut up and investigate. There were a bunch of layers of paint on it and he wanted to know what elements were present. Most of the layers showed up as normal elements, O, Al, Cr, etc., but one layer had to peak at Pr, praseodymium, which is so rare that I forgot that it was even an element. I thought I was going crazy, but my engineer double-checked it and it was definitely there. Turns out that praseodymium is used in certain military-grade paints. Not a forensics worker, but you may be interested to learn that bear semen is one of the most common things found in bodies of people who lay dead in forest areas. What? Gotta be a troll lol. No, it's for real. Bears tend to get confused about the body and will fuck it if it doesn't see the harm in doing so. I just googled bear semen dead bodies with no results. My FBI agent is now very concerned. I'm not a forensic, I'm just a chemist at a lab. We were investigating a case of a serial killer that raped the victims before murdering them. We discovered traces of pepper in the victim's body. I mean, he could have gotten a pepper condom in any sex shop, but he just decided to put real pepper on the victim's genitals. Humans are without limits. The murder weapon in my trainee's bottom left desk drawer. Gonna need more on this one. Sometimes detectives hold onto evidence and will not turn it in for long periods of time because they're idiots. It requires people be very on top of evidence collection. I was reading this as the trainee was the murderer. Hoop. Candle in an old man's bladder. That must have lit your mood. A woman divorces man, they have a daughter. During the marriage, she files complaints saying he is abusive, but never follows through. After divorce, she files a complaint saying her daughter, a child, was raped by her ex. The doctors found evidence that the girl was actually abused, but when samples were analyzed and everything investigated, they found out the mother was putting carrots in the girl's vagina to simulate rape in order to keep her and not share custody. My friend's ma used to work in forensics, and we got told a bunch of stories, the most memorable being of when they found the dead body of a girl hacked into bits inside a bin bag. They at first thought some sicko had murdered her and cut her up, like sickos do. But after further investigation, they discovered something in her lady parts along with a giant hole. Some sciencing later, and the something was an acrylic nail. Turns out she and her girlfriend were doing it when her GF''S nail snapped and ripped her open from the inside, and she bled out. The girlfriend, in a moment of panic, chopped her up and tried to dispose of the body. Edit. For all of you saying this is fake, I don't know if it is or not. Like I said, I got told this by my friend's ma, and she wasn't homophobic or anything. It does seem a little implausible, but human beings are whack creatures, so who knows? Not super shocking compared to others, but the first time you see a computer covered in blood full of bullet holes, it is a moment you do not forget. Was someone shot directly in front of it? I was working in a training lab at the time, so I only know the story secondhand. The guy was wanted for drug and selling illegal firearms. The police got a warrant and they kicked in the door. When they got in, they were greeted by 3 pit bulls. 2 were shot in the living room and 1 ran. When they got to the spare bedroom, the guy was shooting the computer, trying to destroy data stored on it, and he told the dog to attack the police. The officer shot the dog. The guy put the gun down after he unloaded the entire magazine into it and surrendered to the police. As best we could tell, all of the blood came from the dog. He did not destroy the data on the computer as he done how put 10 or 12 bullets in it and missed the hard drive. It looked bad till they started to take it apart. Because of the damage, they had to cut the case apart with a small saw. The reason he was trying to destroy the computer is it had a ton of CP on it. He copped the guns and the drugs but fought the CP charge when he was in one of the videos. He was a total piece of trash. I do not know whatever happened in the case, as I was only allowed to see the computer and watch them cut on it. When they realized this was a much bigger case than they thought it was, they moved us away from it so that we could not mess something up that might mess up the case. I only just started here, so what's shocking to me is probably super minor, but I had a decedent that died and was found with multiple bottles of isopropyl alcohol around her with straws in them. She literally was sipping isopropyl alcohol through straws. It obviously killed her, but I cannot get past the thought of that. How serious of an addiction do you have that doing something like that makes sense? Just the thought of doing that makes my stomach turn. I was a contractor in a lab and discovered the DNA found at the scene of a crime belonged to my boss. If he went down, my contract would not be renewed. Instead, my coworker and I decided to mark the test as inconclusive. 2 years later, the same results, we decided to release the results so I could take his job. It paid off to lie the first time. TLDR, I'm joking.